We're here to talk about chapters 35 to 40. So I just want to check in with you and see if there was anything particularly that stood out for you or you wanted to push back against or etc. Darlene, you're on mic, so I don't know if that means you're up.
It doesn't, but I'll go. I particularly liked on the chapter on 36, Breathe Life, page 97, where you say God does not ask for our firstborn. We thought that up ourselves. I love that. And then how many of us have spent our life afraid that God will punish us in hell forever, while paradoxically saying that God is love and that God came to save the world. And then you talk about that fear of hell didn't change your behavior that much. I can remember being in late grade school, standing in the Highland Baptist Church in Lubbock, Texas, watching this horrendous movie about hell. I mean, it would have scared the bejeebies out of anybody. But it didn't change my behavior. I still danced. I was a dancer and I loved to go to dances. And I was too young, well, in high school, I was too young to drink, but my parents drank at dances, VFW dances, and I wasn't worried about them going to hell. And I remember they took me one time to the VFW with them, and I looked across the dance floor, and on the other side of the room, big ballroom, was my Sunday school teacher, who had told me, the girls' class, that if you drink or dance, you're going to hell. And what was it? She said, lips that touch liquor will never touch mine. And so she and her husband were there drinking and dancing. And it's like, I'm confused.
Wow. I had similar experiences growing up, Darlene. I also was brought up in a Baptist church, and I always add, this is a bless their hearts moment. I always add that there were some wonderful people there who
Absolutely.
are truly loves in my life, and God bless them all. But I saw a lot of that hypocrisy as well. And in fact, I marked that sentence that you just referred to, or those sentences as well, because it didn't ring true for me. It echoed for me for what I heard over and over again when I was growing up. And there would be these moments of inconsistency where there was, sort of a radical forgiveness and acceptance. And then immediately it was followed by some kind of qualification that excluded basically every single person in the world. And when I would ask questions about that, the response that I was always given was to the effect that God's wisdom is greater than ours.
Yeah.
And we can't ever understand God's wisdom, but God is right. When there were tragedies, I remember there was a plane crash one time, and I asked in Sunday school, why did God let that happen? And that was the answer. God's wisdom is greater than ours. And, I think about how maybe, certainly at a certain age, and maybe at a certain level of intellectual or emotional maturity, you just accept that because an authority figure tells you that. But wow, that when I read those words, that really, really rang true for me, because I heard that approach over and over and over again growing up.
Yeah, Sammy, if I can add to it, like one of the lines I remember turning is if we ever said like, well, why should we have to do that? Or why is that okay? The phrase was, who are you, mortal, to question God? Which was like a club of like, hey, you don't get to ask hard questions because you just, bless your heart, you'll never understand. But the people who said that also did not understand, right?
And they were the same ones who were against cremation because, it was a violation of the temple of God. And when you would ask, well, can't God put the ashes back together? And the answer was no, but then there was this exception for soldiers who gave their lives in the service of their countries and were exploded and turned into ashes. That was, he could do that one. but old grandpa in the urn on the mantle was toast.
It's so strange. And if it's okay to say, like, I don't even know that this book really does what I'm trying to figure out personally, like how difficult it is to like tease out the roots of being afraid of God. And like, it was really like interesting to hear the conservative rabbi, somebody asked him about like, what about Jewish people in hell? And like, I don't have the literal quote, but he was like, what a terrible idea. Like, who would think God is so unjust as to like torture somebody forever? I was like, oh, well, like most people I know, me most of my life, like it's so interesting that like, like in Sunday school, I don't think that it was their intent, but quite honestly, like I was just like afraid of God. That was like the thrust of it. Like God is like gonna punish people forever. So you don't want that. But it was like, that's really a tough core image, to like try to recover from. I see it pop up. I mean, look, I'm not trying to be unfair, but like I actually had a parishioner ask me this week, like what is the, it's funny because like, the wording of a question always matters, but it's like, what's the appropriate attitude of Christians toward Jewish people? Because of course they're wrong. And it was sort of like, well, like I'm okay saying that the Hebrew Bible is incomplete, and that doesn't make me an anti-Semite. I'm like, but I think it necessarily does, because when you say you know more than somebody else, like you're saying like they're wrong or that they're incomplete, but you're complete. How is that going to lead to like equity? And I think we struggle with that, like that, hey, like there's one way, and if you don't get it right, like there's hell to pay for that. I don't know if you find that sort of struggle in your own upbringing or in this tradition, and whether or not you think this entry is particularly helpful in thinking about that.
I would like to also continue this questioning. Well, first we say I really appreciate the Epiphany talks, the Respect for Epiphany talks. I've enjoyed all of them, and I really appreciate this opportunity. And so something I've always kind of struggled with, that yes, I want to approach that people of all faith religions are important, and they worship a higher power in their own way, or they come to terms with it in their own way. And then we have scripture where Jesus says, for those who don't, and I can't, I'm paraphrasing terribly, but those who don't accept me have the consequences for that. So how do we reconcile that in our hearts for those of us who want to embrace the global community in that? So, and I'm just curious how you do that.
Maybe if I could add one, maybe, I don't know, just a part to that question, because I think it's on a similar note. I was reading the Bible along with our chapters for this week in the King James Version. And I was struck by, and I'm not looking at it now, but I was struck by Jesus's language, which I know is in translation, which is such a problematic thing in the first place, that disciples must basically hate their families in order to follow me. And I was wondering, why do things get presented to us in such absolute either or kind of fashion? That's what I was thinking about, Adele, in response to what you're talking about. Where is the middle ground that allows for this expansive Christian love and would let someone both recognize and remember and love one's family, but also then be totally devoted to being a disciple? And so then I began to wonder about issues of translation and what is the actual word there in the original, and what are the nuances of that word that have been lost in translation. And I didn't look at the parallel text. I just didn't take time to do it to see what else has been said in English. But I'm also curious about how we reconcile these very different characterizations of our faith versus the manifestations of our faith in our relationship to others.
What verse is that? Do you know off the top of your head? I remember reading it, but I don't remember where it is.
Well, let's see. I'll find it.
Wait, maybe that's it. Hang on.
Luke 14:26. Anyone who comes to me must hate their
Okay.
father and mother. They must hate their wife and
Yes.
children. They must hate their brothers and sisters.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And his own life also.
And then the next sentence I get, and anyone who does not carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. I get that one. But it's all that comes before. And it's not so much the idea of some kind of redefinition of the self and recontextualization of identity. It's not that at all. It's hate.
Mm.
I saw Darlene getting ready to share. I did. You turned your mic off. On. Yeah.
I did. Yeah, Samuel, I can't go there either. I just have to think perhaps he was talking in poetic language of you have to put me first. I can't do the literal. I just can't. Or maybe those weren't his words. I mean, that's blasphemous for me to say that, but perhaps man's interpretation of what he was saying is off.
I do want to say there's not any that I'm aware of, any like cool nuancing of the language to get Jesus off the hook. And actually, like, if you're a historical Jesus scholar, you would say this is one of the most authentic sayings of Jesus because it's so troubling. That is to say, like, editors would have wanted to massage this because it's so countercultural. Is it hyperbolic? Undoubtedly. Right? Undoubtedly hyperbolic, because Jesus did not come to change a jot or a tittle of the law. And as we know, the fifth commandment is honor your father and mother. Right? So how can you honor them and hate them? The only thing I can think of, oh, well, Julia's going to share, which is better than what I think.
Oh, no, you can go. It's fine.
No, please, after you.
I mean, but who hasn't been there before, right? You know, like as a human, like who hasn't been there before where you just struggle with your family and your own life itself, like to, you know, yeah, hate is a hard word. Hate is a hard word, right? But I mean, that just seems like very authentically human to be in that place where you are struggling with your family, with your own, you know, with your kids, with your siblings, and really with your own life. Like, you know, I don't know if it's, you know, is it a prerequisite? I don't know. But I feel like it just is something that I can relate to.
Well, I can too. And as you say, Julie, I'm sure that we all can. But again, for me, what's troubling is that when I've experienced moments like that, you know, my instinct is then move beyond it, you know, and reconcile whatever the issue is, and find a way to put aside that whatever that we're calling hate in this context, those ill feelings, and get back to love. But that is not the message here. I mean, this is an absolute line of before and after. You know, now it's you hate them.
I mean, sorry. Julia,
Sorry.
please.
I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm just but I mean, like, maybe it's not without, like, you're there and you need Jesus, you know, you need Jesus to get you to that place of reconciliation. I don't know. Mike, tell us what it means.
I don't know what it
I
means.
had a thought too, along the line, you know, Julia kind of stimulated something so that it's saying that you don't, maybe my common interpretation is at first you have to reject your family in order to go follow Christ as a disciple. But is it saying that it's human to have these feelings of hate and love and unhappiness with your family, and you have to go through that as a human to be able to be a disciple? Is that?
I mean, I
And
think
Jesus himself, Mike, I mean, you all know better than I do. That Jesus rebukes Mary, right, toward the end of his life, and essentially says something like, I mean, he doesn't say, isn't it like you're not my mother? Or, I mean, he disavows that relationship at some point in similarly harsh language.
he says, who are my mother and my brothers? Those who hear the words of my father and obey them. Right, because his mother and brothers come to carry him away because they think he's nuts. You know, I've overshared this, and this may not be the answer, and you've heard me say this before, but I got to tell you the whole story because I don't think you've heard it, Samuel. There's this book called Group, and it's about this lady who does group therapy, and it's kind of a wild story. But the therapist in the book is this Jewish man. And whenever a client says like, hey, Dr. Rosen, like, I love you, you've done so much to help my life, Dr. Rosen like rubs his chest and he says like, I'm folding that into my heart. And then there's a scene in the book where this lady is having a hard time because the outcomes weren't like what she was hoping for. And she says, you know, damn you, Dr. Rosen, I hate you because this is all bad. And Dr. Rosen like starts rubbing his chest, and she's like, what the hell are you doing? And he says, well, you can only hate people that you love. And so like, I'm folding that into my heart. And so he's like, you know, like I think I shared last week, this Elie Wiesel quote that says the opposite of love isn't hatred, it's indifference. And it makes me wonder like, hey, like on our way, there are these moments of like, I mean, I don't know what you want to call them, but hatred, where you just like the connection you want to have with your family is imperiled or it's unsatisfying. And mainly because you start to see some of this stuff. Like, I hate the fact that my parents were workaholics. I hate that. It doesn't mean I don't love them. Actually, it's because I love them that I hate that. Because it's like a disconnect. And I live into that, you know, like I'm sure my daughter hates that about me. Well, I'm not sure what she hates, but like I often hate that about myself. Here comes that part about hating yourself, right? And it's not like I can just say, well, because I hate that, I'm going to do different. Like it's so deeply rooted, you know, that like I'm asked, I suppose you could say, to commit treason to that identity every day by taking up I mean, that's what taking up your cross means, right? It means committing treason against a dominating system, whether that's workaholism or you fill in the blank, right? And so, and it hurts.
But those examples are, I understand those examples, but they're different, right? Because what you say is, I hate this part of them. And I hate this part of them because I love them. And that's not what this says. Maybe
I don't know.
Maybe the nuances are here. Maybe that's implied here. But you know, it just seems so absolute. And maybe I'm also taking us down the wrong path, because this is one sentence of many that we read, but it really was troubling to me.
I think appropriately. I think if we weren't troubled with it, we wouldn't be taking it seriously. And then the question is, like, I don't think there's anything I can say that's going to resolve the tension, because these are harsh words, right? And I also didn't think that, like, as a person, I'm not like, well, you know, I mean, honestly, my emotional brain rarely is like, my mother is a wonderful, great, faithful person, and I just really dislike this one aspect of her being. No, I'm sort of like, I hate you right now. You know, like, this is the thing. Like, my brain does not, you know, like, usually I go like this, and then I come back to my brain, because actually that's how our brains work. This travels 50,000 times faster, no matter how often you've practiced this. This is faster information, which goes to fight, flight, fear, right? So that, and then, okay, like that's just one part, and I'll miss it when she's gone. I mean, like these are the things we do second, and I wouldn't I'd be lying if there weren't things about and it could be, hey, it's not actually like, well, I'll just say it, there's things about God that I hate. And it may not actually be God, it might be my misconceptions about God that I hate, but either way, viscerally, it's like, ugh. And I'm mad about it. Like sometimes I'm like, Jesus, I know why you didn't have any friends, because I see how you treated the ones that you had, and so like I find myself in that position. And that's because it's not all linear. It's not like you do the right thing and everything, you're going to get everything you want. I was told that as a kid, and I think it's a lie. And of course, what we were told as a kid is like, if you will get everything you want, but you'll want different things. It was just like, come on, like you guys are just trying to build an impermeable bank here, because like, no, like what I want is what I want. I don't know that I can resolve that tension, but I don't think, Samuel, God's interested in us hating ourselves. I do often find myself hating myself. And the question is like, how do I resolve that? So do I hate who God made me to be, or, can I hate those parts that I've settled into that are not who God intended me to be?
It's interesting. I just did a quick Google search, and so of course I now have the most authoritative information in the entire world on this situation, and I'm full of knowledge. But just looking at the 6 or 7 translations offered of this verse, every single one uses the word hate.
Yeah, no,
because what I wanted to find is, what else is there? So, it's interesting that in this unscientific survey, nobody has massaged it out.
Again, I don't think it's massageable, because if it were able to be done, of course, it would be in the biblical interpreter's like best interest to do it. I mean, it's just an offensive saying. Again, we never know tone, and we don't know tone. So it could have been intentionally hyperbolic, but that doesn't take like the hook out of it. Again, like, I don't think there's a normative interpretation. I think, Samuel, like how we know we're doing things well is we consider like, does it lead us to larger life? And if it does, okay, then that's got some traction. And again, like, honestly, like I often find that like what I perceive to be like a right way can create some disconnect between myself and other folk. And I hate that.
Let me ask you, if I may, Mike, about another passage in the Bible from our readings that also I don't understand. And I think part of it is being brought up in a tradition where there was never, I never really understood the Trinity, and that remains a great mystery to me. I mean, I get it, intellectually, but I don't really understand. I don't know how to make sense of it. So in Luke 12:10, Jesus says, "And everyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven. But anyone who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven." So, I guess there are two things here. Speaks a word against does not have the power of blasphemes. And so I don't know that those are exactly the same activities, but they're at least similar,
Yeah.
In some kind of deep criticism. I really have difficulty separating out the components of the Trinity. So can you help me understand how that works? How does this sentence, what does this say? And what does it really mean?
So I think one thing, right, the word Trinity doesn't appear in the Bible at all. And it's maybe helpful to hear that the doctrine of the Trinity doesn't come out of somebody thinking it up. It comes out of early Christians baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that was happening so long, people are like, what does that mean? So I want to be clear. I don't think the text has any understanding of Trinity like we have today. I think that's like an anachronism we map on there. I don't want to say inappropriately. I just don't think that's what was in Jesus's mind, because in the immediate context, what's happened is Jesus has delivered somebody from an unclean spirit, and people said, well, it's just because he's full of Beelzebub. And Jesus's reply is, look, like you can say whatever you want about me, but when you see the hand of God liberating people, be glad. Like you don't need to look for suspicion when people get well, like praise God. And I don't think this is about eternal punishment. I mean, I think really the truth is, like, when you can't recognize God liberating people, what a sad way to live. And in this way, like, Holy Spirit, just to be honest, is a little more like organic and Jewish, right? When God creates the world, it's chaotic, and there's like God's breath is over the world, and then there's order in life. And when God makes a human being, it's clay until God breathes a holy breath. The word spirit means moving air. When God moves some air into the clay, it comes alive, right? And so, like, like what I hear Luke saying when Luke talks about the Holy Spirit is, look, like, how do you think you're alive? You're alive because you're breathing this breath of life. And what's funny, like, I don't understand this scientifically. Like, what's the difference between a living thing and a mineral? Because they can have all the same stuff, but one thing's alive and another thing's not alive. And I get the definition as replicable or can have offspring or whatever, but it's a mystery to me that the same compounds can be dead and as alive. And the mystery is like this, like breath, this like life force, right? And in the question of Luke, it's like, well, who is breathing God's holy breath? Everybody. So when you go say, like, hey, those people at the Baptist church are sinners in the hands of an angry God, it's like, wait a minute, they're breathing God's life. Like, they're alive by God. So how can you blaspheme God putting life into them? I don't know if that's right, Samuel, but I will say, like, I've heard before this stuff like, hey, and Jesus goes on to say to the disciples, right, whoever is not against us is for us. So if you see people healing people, give praise to God. Like, don't worry if they're doing it in the way you would do it. Like, I don't know. To me, that's like part of the parallel.
Well, that kind of comes back to my question earlier.
Yeah.
Of people of all faiths and traditions and higher powers, but we know many that are very, lives that we would like to emulate, that we see very highly worthy. And so how do we make sense of that given, biblical texts and then what we see in life and, action?
Adele, I think it's a really hard question as a clergy person, and I'm going to go ahead and like commit blasphemy on the screen by telling you like the best thing I can figure out about it. I mean, the truth is, like, if I'd been born in Saudi Arabia, I'd be Muslim. And like, I think there's like a lot of, frankly, like Christian arrogance to think like, well, we know all the right things and y'all pagan folk just don't know. And it's like, hey, the price of conversion is to lose everything. And that's real convenient. I don't have to lose anything. It's socially beneficial for me to be Christian, right? There's like, there's a rise of anti-Semitism, not a rise of like anti-Christianity in the country, right? And so part of it is like, I think like the language of faith to me is like my core language. And sort of Gandhi ended up saying this. He said, like, everybody should be like the best whatever they are, because like that's your core language. Like, you don't need to convert from Hinduism to Christianity. Like, you need to be the best Hindu that you can be. Now, I'm not saying nobody should convert, but I had this weird experience with the rabbi, the conservative rabbi, and I shared this already. I said, oh yeah, my brother has converted to Judaism. And the rabbi goes, ugh, he converted? And I was like, well, yeah, he's Orthodox now. And he was like, ugh. And like, I think what the rabbi was kind of saying is, look, like, I was born this way. I don't have a choice. I have to do this. And it's like hard. Why would anybody want to do that? Like, and what he said is all souls belong to God. Like, he said that all souls belong to God. When we die, we go back to God. So why would anybody want to make that hard? His perception was the Jewish life is hard. And I don't know, I guess what other anecdote that I've shared before is I heard my mentoring rector say this in a sermon, that when he finally took calculus with some sobriety, he realized that calculus was just a language for describing like math and being, and math is just its own language. And he said in a sermon, like, well, that's what we have as Christian people, the gift of language. because like we have a language that points to a reality deeper than ourselves, and the world deeply needs that language. Like, well, I think maybe Christian people need Christian language. And because that's my tradition, I'm going to say it. And like, do I think it's right? I think it's right for me. And I know this sounds really liberal. I don't know if it's right for everybody. And I've got my own struggles with it. Like, I'm not sure everybody can redeem being abused by a clergy person. And I think it's unfair to say, if your priest molested you, you have to get over it. That just seems really not okay with me. And so like, the truth is, I don't have another native language. I've studied world religions, and like there's parts, I mean, I kind of wish I'd grown up Jewish, to be honest. Like there's some beautiful things, but I didn't. Like, this is my language. And I'm not convinced I'll ever speak another one. There's things I love about Islam, but like when I read the scriptures, I don't think like cool story back then. I think like, how does that fit my life? And I don't know that I can do that with the Quran or the Mahabharata. Like, I just don't know that I will ever be able to do that. Some people can, and I think good for them. But like, this is part of why I'm here, because this is my life story. Not the only story, it's my life story.
And so I connect with that idea that it's a faith tradition that brings us, hopefully closer to God, and to be a better person here for our larger community, to be a better person. And I could just really see that in listening to all the other speakers we've had, that is such a large tenet of all of them in their own way of how to be a better person and to be better, and give to the community. And, and it was expressed in all of them, including the Wiccan and the past that we heard on Thursday. And I just feel that, that's a beautiful thing, that's a common objective for the traditions that people seek and want to bring in their lives and share with others.
And I hope you don't hear me saying it's all relative. I think because truth is so big and grace is even bigger. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm saying truth is so big and grace is so big that I just can't imagine why God would make us so different if we all had to be the same. Like, I just can't imagine that. It's almost like God is creating insurmountable obstacles for people so they can all be the same. That seems really strange to me. And so like, I think it's sort of like, and I think this is actually part of who we are as Episcopalians. We're not like, hey, you just need to believe these right things and then you get right with God. I think it's more like, hey, like I've got these beliefs and this is language that I cherish, and sometimes it bothers me, but it's my language and it guides me into a deeper life. And I'm happy to share it with you if you're interested. Instead of you must be interested. Like, you must, because if you don't, there's hell to pay. And it just doesn't seem like good news to me. So I guess as your priest, maybe I sound really flighty, but I know if I'd been born into a Jewish household, I'd probably be a rabbi. And I don't think that would be wrong. I mean, I think this is the big part of grace. Like, I think I grew up hearing that God is jealous and petty. Because like you hear this in Exodus, like your God is a jealous God. And so like, if you disrespect God, God is going to like give you the backhand slap to hell. And like my own mother is not that way. And if this is the argument from scripture. If parents know how to treat their children well, how much more does God know how to treat us well? So like, I think we get so afraid we're going to affront God, and like, God is so good, God can't be affronted. Maybe that was like radical, but like, I don't think that means we're like, hey, God, let me show you how flagrantly I can disrespect you. I think the truth is you will never be successful. Even if you want to be flagrant, you can't successfully affront God.
Does God need us?
I mean, does God need anything?
What do you, yeah, right. That's kind of, yeah. I mean, I think we come together to sell on, in our religious services, I think for ourselves to make, we find community and help bring ourselves closer, and we learn from each other and our struggles. But if we didn't do that, I mean, God doesn't need us to worship him, does he?
I mean, I'm a low sacramentarian, Adele, because I don't think God needs any of that stuff. I think we need it.
Yeah, it's kind of.
And
yeah.
look, I think if you can do this all by yourself, like, go for it. I can't.
Mhm.
I can't. And I actually feel a lot of like pathos for people who have been hurt by like church or synagogue communities, and they don't have one of those. Because as much as the stuff that we do is not always great, right? Like, I just have never found the depth of community or philanthropy or like awe and wonder in a running group that I have found here. And if you can, like, that's cool. You know what I mean? Like, I haven't done it. And like, I think those are like really important things to the human experience. Community and awe and wonder and beauty and philanthropy and accountability. Like, those are really wonderful things.
Adele, I was thinking about your question and how, for me, there's such a and this is also why I have difficulty with the post-biblical notion of the Trinity. There's such a sharp distinction between the God of the Old Testament and the Christ of the New Testament, Jesus, and then the Christ of the New Testament. Because when you ask your question, does God need that? I was thinking of the Old Testament God, who certainly demands it. And in demanding it, and in making it such an absolute non-negotiable, you must worship me and not Baal. You must do these things that I command of you, or you go to hell. Well, that God seemed to have needed it, but of course that isn't God. That's a representation of God by those who first wrote that down. But it seems so different to me in the New Testament, because everything seems different. And I realize, again, that's in part because of the nature of the role of Jesus and Jesus becoming Christ. But I think in response to your question, I would say yes, of the Old Testament God.
And I want to say, Samuel, because this is like really, really important. When we use words like Old Testament, I think it actually takes us down the road of anti-Semitism, even if we don't think it is. It's called supersessionism, which is to say, like, God made one deal, it wasn't a great deal, so God made a new deal, and the new deal is really good. And when we use words like Old Testament, we're sort of saying out with the old and with the new. But like, we don't make that distinction when we talk about scripture. We talk about the scriptures. So like, I try to be really big on Hebrew Bible. And what's interesting is to hear how Jewish people read their own scriptures, which is really different from how Christian people read Jewish scriptures. And I just want to tell you one of these core rabbinic stories, if I can. So once upon a time, there's two rabbis arguing about whether or not an oven is kosher. Rabbi, I'm going to make this up because I'm going to get them wrong. Rabbi Gamaliel and Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Gamaliel says, like, this oven is not kosher, it's been violated. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, it's kosher, it can help, or whatever. And then like there's this strong disagreement, and like a tree of life grows out of the ground, holding up the oven and wraps it in fruit as a sign from God that the oven is fine. Rabbi Gamaliel goes back and says, this oven is not kosher. Like, it's had dairy in it and it's had meat, it's no good. And again, Rabbi Akiva says, well, look at the sign, and yes, it is. And then like the oven starts to glow with like a holy light, showing that the oven is in fact also like it's holy and fine. Rabbi Gamaliel again says, like, no, it's not, it's had whatever. And then finally a voice from heaven says, the oven is okay. And Rabbi Gamaliel says, but out, you gave us the Torah and it's ours to live into. And the story concludes, and God laughed because God had been bested by God's children. So like that's a rabbinic understanding, a core rabbinic understanding. And as Christian people, we were taught to read that the God of the Hebrew Bible is petty and mean and whatever. So we read it that way. But the most recurring word in the Psalter is the word steadfast love, which is like agape in Hebrew, the most recurring noun that is not like a, like a personal pronoun is chesed, which is steadfast love. And, like, again, I think there's another way to read Genesis, which is all the patriarchs and matriarchs are flawed as heck. And God doesn't strike them dead. Like God puts up with them. And these are the people. So like, I think like it depends on how we read, quite honestly. And then I think the other question we always have to ask, right? Like we have emotions. Does that mean God does? Do we give God emotions because we have them and it helps us understand? So I think all of that's really caught up in this. And again, I've had like a really serious inquiry with somebody this week that's like, supersessionism is not anti-Semitism. And in my own mind, how can you tease them apart? How can you say we know more fully than Jewish people, so we're all equal? Does that make sense what I'm saying? If you know more, you're not equal. And I do think this is a tough question, and I think what's helpful to hear is like Jesus in John 14, he doesn't say, I am the answer. He says, I'm the way. He doesn't say I'm the end of faith. I'm the way. So like, let's travel together. I don't know if that's helpful, Samuel. I mean, I know that most of my Jewish brothers and sisters don't think God is like a vengeful, hateful, emotionally out of control being. And when you read the Acts of Apostles, right? I mean, keep in mind, Jesus chased people with a whip and he cursed a fig tree because it didn't have fruit when it wasn't supposed to have fruit. King Herod drops over dead because, people say this is the voice of a God, not a man, and he doesn't refute them. Paul strikes a guy blind. I mean, it's like, we just have to remember, like, it's not like the New Testament is incident free. When you read about things like holy war, which is like kill all the women and children, I have a hard time reading that, but I also would like you to consider no one's ever practiced that. I mean, like holy war in Iraq would mean like, okay, go ahead and overthrow the government and then burn all the oil because you can't profit from a holy war. Well, let's be honest, if there was no profit from war, nobody would fight one. So we don't fight holy wars. We don't. We fight wars that are motivated by, to some measure, by profit. And like, I guess you could read it as God is exactly like this, or you could read philosophically, what are we willing to take life over? And is my financial enrichment worth taking your life? This is the way Jewish people read their own scriptures. This is what I'm going to suggest to you is like, what is this really all about? Instead of, oh, God is literal and arbitrary and like vindictive and mean. I grew up reading that in Sunday school, but again, that's not the only way to read this. I got to tell you, I don't think I could ever be a Viking warlock. I just, like, and I read all those stories. I read them when I was in middle school. I love Norse mythology. Like, it's just fascinating. And But honestly, like if you grew up in a different culture and I started reading some Bible stories to you, you might be like, do, 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 like, oh, a talking donkey, okay. I mean, like, let's be honest, as part of it is because of like, what's our basis?
Mhm. Well, yes, because I was reflecting on Thursday's talk and thinking how our presenters and their practices of spellcraft and such. And I was appreciating how sincere she was in talking about it. And I appreciated the audience was very earnest in listening. And so, but a part of me was thinking, oh, she really believes that. And then later I thought, well, yeah, there's stuff in our Christianity that other people think, how can they believe that? As that's so silly that they hold that so true and live by that. And so, we all have things in our lives and our faith that we come to by faith. And it takes a whole lot of respect for each other, as far as where each other come. But yes, and then it makes you reflect on it's so helpful to understand others' tradition and then to come back and think about your own and what it means to us and me.
Yeah, and I said this morning. I mean, I thought it would be really amazing to have a small group of people and each person starts with a toast, like, thank God for this thing in my life. Mm-hmm. And then each person says, I'm so grateful I accomplished this thing in the last month. Yeah. And then each person says, and I want to grow in this way. Mm-hmm. Gratitude and pride and growth. I mean, that's like the basis of living in community, isn't it? All three of them, not just like, oh, I'm terrible at this thing, or just thank you. Like all three of them together is like community basis. It's like a lovely ritual,
Well, thank you, everyone. I've got to go to get ourselves out the door in time, and we'll see you around. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Samuel, I think you turned on.
Yeah, I was thinking about passage in, I think it's the first chapter that we read for today, where you're talking about unmarked graves, walking over unmarked graves, falling into unmarked graves, and so forth. And you say, I don't think Jesus is warning against tradition that is not logical or sensible. Mystery is at the heart of faith. I think he is warning against a tradition without reason. And I was thinking about how, so much of what we're talking today, it exemplifies that, because, we're taking these things that we do believe, things that are part of our tradition, but things that are hard and things that on the outside looking in don't make sense. And I'm not talking about the extremes that you were describing a minute ago and the examples that you gave, but even things like our discussion of hate today, but with reason, then we're able to begin to work through that and reconcile ourselves to it. So I just wanted to observe that was a really meaningful, one of many meaningful passages that made me think about what it is that we do as we practice our faith and why that's so important.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like when you think about even education, right? Like sometimes you teach children developmentally, like this is what we do. This is what we do. And then like the why or the opportunity comes later. And I'm not sure that that's inappropriate. I just think that like the why and the how, like are important enough that we don't want to live in like an arrested development of faith where we just say, this is just what we do. Well, I want to respect everybody's time, and I was the one on late, and I know some people are coming. So thank you for joining. I'm not going to be here next week. So we'll come back in 2 weeks. Next week, Joanne Sailors will be here, and I'm going to go to a gymnastics tournament. Yeah. So thank you all. I really appreciate your reading and your thoughtfulness, and I'll see you in 2 weeks, if not before.
Good to see you all.